The last thing I remember is the taste of rain, muddy and thick, filling my mouth and nose. The cold was not a shock but a creeping numbness, starting at my fingertips and toes and moving inward, toward a heart that had already been frozen for years. My name is Lin Yinyin. I died in a drainage ditch on the outskirts of Willow Creek Village on a rainy night in 1992, thrown out by the family I had given my life to serve. The man whose future I had bought with my own, Zhang Ming, stood on the bank with his new wife, watching my body be fished out with the detached curiosity of someone observing a minor bureaucratic inconvenience. My life had been a ledger of debits. In 1977, when the news crackled over the village loudspeaker that the National College entrance examinations, the Gaokao, were reinstated, I was standing over a steaming pot of pig feed. My hands were raw and chapped, my back a permanent ache. Zhang Ming, my husband of 2 years, had been pacing the packed earth floor of our one-room house, a restless energy humming off him like a trapped wasp. We had both been students once, dreaming with our heads in identical dog-eared books. Then his father fell ill, the debts piled up, and the stark arithmetic of rural survival took over. Someone had to work the fields, tend the pigs, care for the ailing parents. That someone, by the unspoken decree of tradition and my own foolish love-struck heart, was me. I sold my books. I sold the good wool coat my own mother had saved for 3 winters to buy me. I took the money and placed it in Zhang Ming's clean scholar's hands. "You take the exam," I'd said, my voice trembling only a little. "Your mind is brighter. I'll hold things here." He had looked at me, his eyes shining with a fervor that was for himself, for his escape, not for me. "Yinyin," he'd said, gripping my calloused hands. "When I succeed it will be for both of us. I'll bring you to the city. You'll wear silk." I believed him. That was my first and greatest mistake. I believed the promises more than I believed the evidence of my own life. That promises were currency spent freely by those who had no intention of paying. For 15 years I was the foundation upon which his ascent was built. When his acceptance letter came from a teacher's college in the provincial capital, I wept with a joy that felt like my own victory. My labor intensified. I moved fully into the Zhang family compound, a collection of low mud brick buildings around a dusty courtyard. His mother, a woman with eyes like flint and a tongue like a paring knife, became my overseer. His father, a silent, coughing shadow by the hearth, my patient. His younger sister, Xiaoling, a perpetually dissatisfied girl on the cusp of womanhood, my burden. Zhang Ming left. The village celebrated him, the first in a generation to become a dragon. I stayed, the dragon's anchor in the mud. I rose before dawn to prepare the day's meals, worked the collective's fields under a blistering sun, hauled water from the distant well, tended the private vegetable patch that was our only source of income, mended clothes by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, and soothed his mother's endless litany of complaints. Every month I scraped together a few yuan from selling eggs or vegetables and sent them to him in a carefully folded envelope. "For your nourishment," I would write in my clumsy, fading script. He rarely wrote back. When he did, the letters were brief, full of grandiose descriptions of lectures and city lights, ending with a perfunctory, "Take care of mother and father." I bore his child alone. Daughter Xiaomei. My mother-in-law's face, when she saw the baby was a girl, crumpled into a mask of such profound disappointment it felt like a curse. "A broken branch," she muttered, turning away. Zhang Ming did not come home for the birth. He sent a telegram, tied up with important studies. "Send news." I read it in my childbed, the paper crisp and foreign, while my own mother wiped my brow and hummed an old, sad song. The years wore on, carving lines into my face and strength from my body. Zhang Ming graduated, was assigned a teaching post in a distant county, then through some bureaucratic maneuvering I never understood, secured a transfer to an administrative role at the prefectural border, a position with a whiff of official power. He visited Willow Creek perhaps once every 2 or 3 years, a visiting dignitary in stiff new clothes that smelled of camphor and city smoke. He was polite to me, distant, like a guest thanking a particularly diligent servant. He would play with Xiaomei for a few awkward minutes, then retreat into conversation with the village head, his voice taking on a cadence of authority that sounded alien in our courtyard. I heard whispers, of course. Village women, their sympathy edged with a cruel curiosity, would ask if I'd seen my husband's new wristwatch, or if it was true he had a motorcycle. Someone's cousin had seen him in the county seat, eating in a restaurant with a woman who was not me. I dismissed it as gossip. To believe it was to admit the ledger of my life was not just unbalanced but a fiction. I had invested everything in Zhang Ming's success. To doubt it was to doubt my own existence. Then the final transfer came. He was being brought back to a senior position in our own county government. It was, everyone said, a triumphant homecoming. My heart, a dormant seed under frost, dared to stir. Perhaps now, after all the waiting, the life of both of us would begin. Perhaps Xiao Mei would know her father. Perhaps I would touch silk. He arrived on a day of lashing autumn rain, the kind that turns the village paths into rivers of sucking brown mud. There was no fanfare. A single official jeep splattered to a halt outside the compound. He stepped out holding a black umbrella. And then he turned and offered his hand to another figure emerging from the vehicle. She was perhaps 10 years younger than me, dressed in a smart blue serge suit and low-heeled leather shoes, her hair cut in a stylish urban bob. She moved with a confidence that seemed to repel the mud. And clinging to her hand was a boy of about 5, his little face a perfect, petulant copy of Zhang Ming's. Time stopped. The drumming rain faded to a muffled roar. I stood in the doorway, my work-roughened hands clutching the frame, wearing my oldest patched trousers and a faded tunic. I was holding a wooden bucket I had just filled at the well. The courtyard, usually alive with the squawking of chickens and his mother's complaints, was silent. His parents had emerged from the main house. Their faces were not surprised. They were resigned, grimly expectant. Zhang Ming did not look at me. He ushered the woman and the boy toward the main house, under the shallow eaves. Then he finally turned. His gaze swept over me from my muddy feet to my rain-plastered hair, and there was nothing in it. No guilt, no shame, not even annoyance. Just a blank, administrative assessment. Lin Yining, he said, his voice the one he used on incompetent subordinates. This is Su Xiu and my son Zhang Li. My son. The words were 2 bricks slamming into my chest. His mother, Auntie Zhang, found her voice first. She stepped forward, her arms crossed. Yining, you have been a good daughter to this house. You have worked hard. But Ming is an important man now. He needs a compatible companion. He needs a son to carry on the line. You understand how these things are. I did not understand. I understood nothing. The world had become a poorly dubbed play where everyone knew their lines but me. Xiaoling, now a sharp-faced woman, sneered from behind her mother. Look at you, Saozi. You're an old woman. You look more like his aunt than his wife. What would people say if he brought you to official functions? You'd shame him. The words were daggers, but they glanced off the numbness that had encased me. I looked only at Zhang Ming. He met my gaze finally, and in his eyes I saw the final balance of the ledger. My youth, my labor, my dreams, my very flesh in the form of our daughter, all entered on the debit side. His success, his new family, his unbroken lineage, all on the credit. And the difference was a void in which I was meant to disappear. We have nothing to say to each other anymore, he said. It was a statement of fact, dry and final. Su Xiu gave a small, pitying smile. The boy stared at me with blank curiosity. They didn't even let me pack. Xiaoling roughly shoved a cloth bundle into my arms, a few of my own threadbare clothes. Xiao Mei was at my mother's house for the afternoon. They didn't ask about her. I was simply ushered out into the sheeting rain, the wooden door of the Zhang compound closing with a soft, definitive thud behind me. I walked. I don't know for how long. The rain blinded me, mixed with the tears I hadn't known I was crying. The mud sucked at my shoes. The bundle grew heavy. I thought of Xiao Mei's face. I thought of my mother's small, warm hut on the other side of the village. I thought of the silk I would never touch. The path skirted the old irrigation ditch, now swollen and rushing with brown water. My foot, numb with cold, caught on a submerged root. There was a moment of weightlessness, a shocking plunge into icy blackness. The water filled my nose, my mouth. I did not fight it. The cold was just an extension of the cold inside me. The water was just a darker, quieter version of the world that had already drowned me. As the darkness took me, a final crystalline thought formed, not in words, but in pure, anguished feeling. If I could live my life over, I would never. Consciousness returned not as a sunrise, but as a slow, painful seep. There was a frantic animal rooting at my breast, a sharp, sweet stickiness on my lips. A smell of blood, milk, and stale sweat. A cacophony of angry voices, muffled by a thin wall. I forced my eyes open. Weak, grayish light filtered through a single small window pasted over with yellowing newspaper. I knew that newspaper. It was from 1976, featuring a stern-faced model worker. I knew the water stains on the ceiling, the crack in the mud wall shaped like a rooster. This was my room. The room in the Zhang compound. But it was younger. The crack was smaller. The newspaper less brittle. And in my arms, her tiny face screwed up in furious hunger, was a newborn baby. Xiaomei. A wave of vertigo, more profound than the ditch's current, washed over me. I tried to sit up and a deep, familiar ache gripped my lower body, the ache of recent childbirth. My hands flew to my face. The skin was smooth if pale and tired. No deep lines carved by sun and sorrow. My hair, though lank with sweat, was thick and dark. The voices from the main room sharpened, piercing my confusion. It is a simple bag of brown sugar. Must you make a national incident of it? It was Zhang Ming's voice, tight with self-righteous indignation. Comrade Wang died a hero protecting the collective storehouse. His widow is alone and ill. Is it not our socialist duty to care for her? She asks for a little sugar to ease her cough, and you guard it like a capitalist banker. My mother's voice, strained and defensive. This sugar. I sold 2 roosters for this sugar. It's for Yinin. Her blood is weak after the birth. She needs it to make milk. Milk. Zhang Ming's scoff was audible. She has a mother to help her. Sushio has no one. Your thinking is so small, so backward. We must unite and help our comrades. Sushio. The name was a spike of ice in my gut. The stylish woman in the blue serge suit. Here? No. But of course. She had always been here, the widow in the compound next door. In my first life I had been blind, then willfully ignorant. Now the truth crashed over me with the weight of remembered betrayal. This argument. This exact moment. I had lived it. I was back. Not just in the past, but at the precise fulcrum of my misery. Days after giving birth to Xiaomei. My mother, in a gesture of heartbreaking sacrifice, had procured a bag of precious brown sugar for me. It sat, unopened, on the rickety table beside my bed. And Zhang Ming was already trying to requisition it for her. I pinched the soft flesh of my inner arm hard. The pain was bright, shocking, real. This was no dream, no death hallucination. The coarse blanket under me, the baby's desperate suckling, the metallic taste of exhaustion in my mouth. It was all terrifyingly, exhilaratingly tangible. I had been given back my life. Not at the beginning, but here in the deep mud of my sacrifice, with a newborn child and a husband already emotionally absent. The despair of my death in the ditch curdled, then transformed. It did not vanish, but it was forged in an instant into something else. A cold, hard, and utterly focused resolve. I would not live that life again. I would not die that death. The door to my room creaked open. Zhang Ming stood there, backlit by the dim light of the main room. He was so young. The gentle, scholarly features that had once made my heart flutter were still there, unhardened by the arrogance that would later set into them like concrete. He looked at me not with concern, but with exasperation, as if I were a problem he had been assigned to solve. You're awake. Good. You heard. He didn't phrase it as a question. Sushio is suffering. That sugar would be of more use to her. You have your mother here. She can make you some ginger tea instead. In my first life I had said nothing. I had turned my face to the wall, hot tears of self-pity and powerlessness soaking into the straw pillow, my heart breaking at his callousness. My silence had been his permission. Now I shifted Xiaomei gently, meeting his gaze. My voice came out hoarse from disuse but steady. That sugar was bought with my mother's money. For me. To recover from bearing your child. He blinked, recoiling slightly as if I'd spoken in a foreign dialect. This was not the script. Yinin, be reasonable. I am thinking of the collective good, of solidarity. You had some schooling. You should understand this progressive thinking. Sushio and I, we are just comrades. There is nothing sordid about it. Your jealousy is so petit bourgeois. The hypocrisy was so naked it was almost impressive. I remembered the rest of this day with a clarity honed by bitter hindsight. Later Sushio would visit, bringing a pair of cheap factory-made socks for Auntie Zhang. My mother-in-law would fawn over her, praising her thoughtfulness. Zhang Ming would beam, pulling out a stool for her. And Su Xiu, in a voice dripping with honeyed gratitude, would say, "Thank you for the sugar, Teacher Zhang. I already feel much better." Her eyes would hold his, a private message passing between them over my prone, bleeding body. And later still, when my mother had stepped out, Su Xiu would linger by my bedside. She would lean close, her breath smelling of that very sugar, and whisper the words that had haunted me for years. "Did you know, Lin Yining, while you were screaming in labor, Zhang Ming took me to see a movie in the county town? The white-haired girl. It was so romantic in the dark. While I had fought to bring his daughter into the world, tearing my body in the process, he had been sharing cinematic romance with his comrade. The memory was a clean, surgical knife, cutting away the last of my confusion. I looked at the man in the doorway, this handsome stranger I had called my husband. The love I had carried for him was a ghost, a weight I had already drowned with. All that remained was a clear, cold space, ready to be filled with a new purpose. "Take it," I said, my voice flat. A flicker of surprise, then smug satisfaction crossed his face. I could be brought to reason. "Take the sugar," I repeated, holding his gaze. "And consider it the last thing you will ever take from me." He frowned, not understanding the finality in my tone. He was used to my quiet acquiescence being the end of every conflict. He simply saw the obstacle removed. He stepped in, snatched the precious paper bag from the table, and left without another word, closing the door on the life we were supposed to share. I looked down at Xiaomei, who had finally latched on and was feeding with urgent, rhythmic gulps. Her tiny hand rested against my skin, a starfish of absolute trust. "It's just you and me now, little one," I whispered into the soft, damp crown of her head. "And we are going to climb out of this mud. We are going to fly." My eyes drifted to the newspaper on the wall. 1976. The characters swam before my eyes, then focused with terrible clarity. Next year. 1977. The exams would return. This time I would not be the one boiling pig feed while someone else sat for the test. This time the pen would be in my hand. But first I had to survive. I had to heal. And I had to learn to see the battlefield upon which I had been a willing casualty. The battlefield of my own home. The immediate problem was physical. I was weak, my milk was thin, and Xiaomei was hungry. The loss of the sugar was a tangible blow. My mother crept in later, her eyes red-rimmed. "I'm sorry, daughter. He is the man of the house." "It doesn't matter, Ma," I said, and the steadiness in my own voice surprised us both. "The sugar is gone. But we are not. I need you to do something for me. Go to Auntie Feng, the midwife. Ask her for the recipe for the herbal tea that promotes milk. The one with goji berries and dried longan. Don't tell anyone here. Use the last of the money from the roosters to buy the ingredients in the next village over." My mother stared at me. This was not the broken, weeping daughter of an hour ago. This was someone giving orders. She nodded, a spark of her own defiance lighting in her eyes. "I'll go now." While she was gone, I took stock. The room held nothing of value. My clothes were patched. My savings, what little I'd scraped together before the birth, were hidden in a hole in the wall behind the bed. Zhang Ming didn't know about it. It was a few yuan, maybe 5. A fortune to me, a pittance to the world. It was my seed capital. I also took stock of the enemy, a word I would never have used before but which now fit with cold precision. Zhang Ming. Ambitious, selfish, emotionally manipulative, armed with the weapon of his education and male privilege. Auntie Zhang. Traditional, status-obsessed, viewing me as a tool for her son's advancement and a vessel for grandsons. Xiaoling. Jealous, petty, a potential informant and saboteur. Su Xiu. The external threat, skilled in the art of fragile femininity and covert warfare. And my allies? My mother. Xiaomei. And I realized with a jolt myself. A self that had been to the bottom of the ditch and back. A self that knew the ending of this story. The next few days were a theater of passive resistance. Auntie Zhang expected me back at the stove within the week. "A woman who births a girl doesn't need a month of lying in," she declared the morning after the sugar incident. "The fields won't plant themselves." In my first life I had obeyed, bundling Xiaomei to my back, my body screaming in protest. Now I simply said, "The midwife said I have a tear. If I work too soon I could get an infection, become sterile. Then you would have no hope of a grandson from me at all." It was a gamble, appealing to her own vested interest. She glared, but the threat of permanent broken branches gave her pause. She huffed and stomped out, muttering about lazy modern girls. Zhang Ming, meanwhile, was playing the part of the misunderstood progressive. He brought me a cup of hot water that night, a gesture so minuscule it was insulting. You must understand the larger picture, Enin, he said as if explaining to a slow child. We are building a new society. Old sentiments like possessive marriage, they hold us back. I took the cup. Thank you. I said nothing else. I didn't argue about Sushio. I didn't plead for understanding. I conserved my energy. The hot water was useful. I drank it. His words were not. He was unnerved by my silence. He was used to my tears, my pleas, my emotional reactions that he could then dismiss as backward or hysterical. This calm, this detached acceptance was a language he didn't speak. The true test came at breakfast a few days later. We were all gathered around the low table, porridge, pickles, a single salted egg for Zhang Ming. And as if summoned by the script of my memory, Su Xiu appeared at the courtyard gate. She was a vision of carefully curated need. Her clothes, though simple, were clean and fitted. A faint, delicate cough escaped her as she approached. Auntie Zhang, Teacher Zhang, good morning. I am sorry to disturb. My family's plot. The corn is so heavy. I wondered if Teacher Zhang could spare a little time to help today. Her eyes, large and luminous, settled on Zhang Ming. His face transformed. The indifference he showed at home melted into a hero's gentle concern. Of course, Comrade Su. I will come right after breakfast. This was my cue. In my first life I had said nothing, seething inside as I spooned porridge into Xiao Mei's mouth. Now I spoke, my voice clear in the quiet courtyard. Ming, today is the day we must take Xiao Mei for her first vaccination. We discussed it last night. And we need to buy formula. My milk is still not enough. I looked directly at him. Don't forget to bring your wages from yesterday. The clinic needs payment up front. The air in the courtyard solidified. Su Xiu's smile didn't waver, but it stiffened like paint cracking. Zhang Ming's spoon halted midair. He glanced from my placid face to Su Xiu's expectant one. We can go tomorrow, he stammered. One day won't matter. I don't have the cash on me today. The vaccination was already postponed, I said, my tone that of a simple fact-checker. The nurse was very clear. You received your wages yesterday. Where is the money? Su Xiu fluttered into the breach, her voice a soothing balm. Sister Enin, Teacher Zhang only wishes to help me, a helpless widow. Perhaps you could take the child first? He can settle the household matters later. Her phrasing was perfect. Placing me as the household matter, him as the noble public servant. It worked on him. His shoulders relaxed. He nodded at her, a look of profound understanding passing between them. It's fine. I'll help her first. A woman alone, how can she manage? They were a perfect duet, singing the song of his magnanimity and her vulnerability. I was the discordant note in the audience. I set my bowl down with a soft, definitive click. Zhang Ming, I said, and the use of his full name made him flinch. You are so full of sympathy for every hardship but the one in your own home. Who is your wife? Who is the mother of your child? You cannot even produce money for your own daughter's health. I ask you again directly in front of your parents and our neighbor. Where is your salary? A small, sharp voice, dripping with malicious delight, piped up from beside Auntie Zhang. It was Xiaoling, her mouth full, her eyes alight with the prospect of drama. Big brother gave the money to Sister Su Xiu last night. I saw him by the well. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant crow of a rooster. In my first life, this revelation had been the catalyst for my first slap from Zhang Ming, a punishment for shaming him and bullying a widow. I had been the one left sobbing, forced to apologize. This time I said nothing. I simply observed the tableau. Auntie Zhang's face, first confused, then dawning with horrified comprehension as the financial implications hit her. Old Zhang's quiet cough. Zhang Ming's panic quickly masked by bluster. Su Xiu's expertly summoned flush of shame, her eyes downcast. I broke the silence with a sigh that sounded, even to my own ears, remarkably like boredom. I see. So this month's wages are already spent. What of last month's wages? And the month before? For years, you've told me you were saving, that we were building a future for when you finished your studies. You told me your father's medicine was expensive, that Xiaoling's school fees were due. I covered those from my own labor in the collective and from selling our vegetables. So where is the savings book, Zhangming? Where is our money? I stood lifting Xiaomei gently. It seems our daughter's health ranks below a neighbor's corn. A fascinating set of priorities for a father. I turned and walked back to my room, leaving behind a silence that was no longer just awkward but tectonic. I didn't close the door fully. I stood just inside listening. The storm broke immediately. Auntie Zhang's voice, shrill with a new personal fear. You gave our money to her? Our household money? For corn? Your father needs medicine next week. Old Zhang's wheezing interjection. Foolish boy. Zhang Ming's defensive rising whine. It was a loan. He was ill. It's socialist duty. She'll pay it back after the harvest. Xiaoling adding fuel. He's given her money before, Mama. I've seen. I smiled a thin, hard smile in the dim light of my room. I had changed the first equation. I had introduced a new variable. His family's self-interest. They depended on his income. The idea that it was being diverted was a threat more immediate to them than any moral failing. I had won the first skirmish. Not with tears but with a simple public audit. The fortress of his privilege had a crack. And I would spend every day of this new life widening it until I could walk right out. The aftermath of the breakfast table audit rippled through the Zhang household like a stone tossed into a stagnant pond. The calm that descended was not peace, but the brittle, watchful silence of a reordered hierarchy. I was no longer just the dutiful daughter-in-law. I was now a potential whistleblower, a keeper of uncomfortable financial truths. Zhang Ming was visibly chastened not by guilt, but by the sudden scrutiny from his parents. The cozy narrative of him as the family's brilliant hope was now shadowed by the accusation of him as its financial saboteur. He performed a spectacular if transparent volte-face. After work at the village granary office, he no longer lingered on the path where Su Xiu might accidentally meet him. Instead he came straight home, took off his town shirt, and in an almost comical display of newfound rustic vigor, picked up a hoe and headed to the family plot. He sweated under the late autumn sun, his scholar's palms blistering, under the watchful eye of his father, who had taken to sitting on a stool at the edge of the field, a silent auditor of his son's penitence. In the evenings the cup of hot water became a ritual. He would place it by my bedside table with a sigh that was meant to convey weary nobility. The harvest is heavier this year, he'd say, or father's breathing seems worse in the cold. He was laying the groundwork, testing the waters to see if the old dynamic, where his minor efforts were met with my torrent of gratitude and reassurance, could be restored. I observed it all from behind a wall of polite detachment. I took the hot water. I said, "Thank you." I offered no more. In my first life, these crumbs would have been a feast, proof he still cared, a reason to redouble my own efforts. Now I saw them for what they were, currency. He was trying to buy back my compliance, my silence, my labor at the lowest possible cost. My focus was elsewhere. On Xiaomei, who was thriving on the herbal tea and the thin but steady stream of my milk, supplemented by the precious formula I had insisted upon. On my own body, healing with a slowness I now cherished, for it kept me temporarily out of the fields and the heart of the household grind. And on my mind, I had retrieved my tiny hoard of savings from behind the loose brick. 5 yuan and 70 fen. Felt like a treasure map. I needed a plan, an enterprise that was invisible to the Zhang family, something that could generate capital for my ultimate escape. The 1977 Gaokao. The answer came from the very backbone of village life, the harvest. Willow Creek's secondary cash crop was peanuts. After the autumn rice was gathered, every household turned to the mountains of peanut plants, hauling them home to dry. Then began the endless finger-breaking labor of shelling. For weeks, the soundtrack of the village was the soft, percussive pop-pop-pop of peanuts being cracked open by hand, late into the night by women and children with raw, sore fingers. The nuts were sold to the state purchasing station. The shells fed the cooking fires. I remembered this grind viscerally. In my first life after Xiaomei was weaned, it had been my winter task, my contribution to the household fund, that never seemed to materialize. I had shelled until my thumbnails split and my vision blurred, earning a pittance per gene. The work had aged my hands a decade. Now I saw it not as a fate but an opportunity. What if there was a faster way? I needed an ally, someone outside the Zhang family's sphere of influence, someone practical and discreet. I thought of my cousin Deshawn. He was a few years older than me, a quiet, solid man who had taken over his parents' small holding when his father died. He was known not for his talking but for his ability to fix anything. A broken cart, a seized pump, a radio that had given up the ghost. He was also, crucially, unmarried and answerable to no in-laws. I sent a message with my mother, who made a trip to the next village on the pretext of visiting her sister. A few days later, under the cover of market day, I met Deshawn by the crumbling old Lu bridge, Xiaomei swaddled and asleep against my chest. "Cousin," I said, dispensing with pleasantries. "I have a business proposition. A private one." He chewed on a stalk of grass, his eyes wary but interested. "What kind of business?" "Peanut shelling." He almost smiled. "You mean everyone shells peanuts? There's no business in that. It's just work." "Exactly. It's too much work. What if we could do it in 1/10 of the time?" I described the machine I had seen in a faded agricultural magazine once, years ago, in Zhang Ming's discarded papers. A small, hand-cranked peanut sheller with rotating drums and a winnowing fan. They make them at the agricultural implement factory in the county seat. It's not a tractor, it's small. We could buy one, set it up in your shed. People bring us their unshelled peanuts, we shell them for a fee per gene. We save them time and sore fingers. They save a little of their profit, but they get their nuts to market faster. Deshawn's eyes lost their vagueness. He was calculating. The machine costs money. "I have the initial capital," I said, lowering my voice. 5 yuan. It might be enough for a deposit or to buy a used one. You provide the space, the labor to run it, and your skills to keep it working. We split the profits 50-50. All in secret. Secret from who? From my husband's family. From everyone. This is yours and mine. Ours. The word ours hung between us, charged with a meaning beyond partnership. Deshawn had always been kind to me in his silent way. He looked at Xiaomei's sleeping face, then back at me. He saw the determination in my eyes, a look he'd never seen on the tired young girl he remembered. "The Zhang family won't like it," he stated. "The Zhang family," I said evenly, "is not included in this venture. Or in my future plans." He was quiet for a long moment, watching the brown water swirl under the bridge. Then he nodded once. "I'll go to the county seat next market day. See about the machine." A surge of pure, unadulterated hope flooded me. It was my first autonomous act in this new life. It was a tiny crack in the wall of my destiny. Back at the compound, the performance continued. After a week of his exemplary behavior, Zhang Ming finally approached me with his real agenda. It was evening, Xiaomei was fed and asleep. He stood by the bed, his shadow looming on the newspapered wall. "Inin," he began, his voice assuming a tone of weary partnership. "The fertilizer seller from East Creek was here today. He's demanding settlement for the spring order. The bill is 4 yuan. You have it. Pay him tomorrow." I didn't look up from mending one of Xiaomei's tiny socks. "I'm on maternity leave. I have no wages. Where would I get 4 yuan? You must have some put aside," he pressed, a note of irritation creeping in. "For emergencies. Use that. I'll repay you from next month's salary." I set the sock down and finally met his eyes. "Put aside? Zhang Ming, when I gave birth, I paid the 2 yuan fee at the clinic. For years, have you ever handed me a single fun of your salary? You told me it was all going into our future fund, for when you finished your studies and we could build a house. So where is this fund? Where is the savings book?" His face hardened. "Must everything be a transaction with you now? You have a stable job at the textile collective. You can manage. But Sushio, she has no one. No wages. She can't support herself. Would you really be so heartless as to let a hero's widow starve?" There was the core of his moral universe beautifully exposed. My need, the needs of his child and parents, were transactions. Sushio's need was a noble cause, a romantic tragedy he was born to resolve. A cold, mirthless smile touched my lips. "Then by all means support her. Be her savior. But can you stand there and watch your own father go without his lung medicine because you gave his medicine money to another woman? Can you tell Xiaoling she can't go to middle school because your comrade needed a new winter coat? You want to be charitable, Zhang Ming? Start with the people whose bowl you already eat from. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The logic was irrefutable and thus enraging. He was not used to logic from me, he was used to emotion which he could dismiss. I had weaponized his own family's survival against his fantasy. You, he sputtered, his face flushing. You've become venomous. I've become awake, I corrected softly. I picked up the sock again, signaling the end of the conversation. He stood there for a moment, quivering with impotent fury, then yanked the cloth divider aside so violently the bamboo pole rattled, and stormed out into the main room. I heard the low, urgent murmur of his parents' voices, his sullen, defensive replies. The seed of financial fear I had planted was sprouting, and its roots were tangling around his ankles. The following week, Deshawn returned. He met me at the back of the compound near the pigsty, a place no one lingered. His eyes were alight. I found one, he whispered. At the factory salvage yard. An old model, slightly dented, missing a handle. The foreman said it was headed for the scrap pile. I got it for 3 yuan and 2 packs of Flying Horse cigarettes. He almost grinned. I can fix it. I have spare parts from an old rice winnower. 3 yuan. It was more than half my capital gone in an instant. It felt like the best investment I would ever make. I passed him the crumpled bills, our fingers brushing in the straw-scented gloom. When can it be ready? A week. I'll tell people I'm repairing a thresher for old Chen. A week later, the machine, cleaned, patched, and fitted with a new crank handle, sat under a tarp in Deshan's toolshed. It was a clunky, ugly, beautiful thing. We tested it on a sack of his own peanuts. The roar was tremendous, a mechanical beast awakening in the quiet village. But in minutes, a mountain of raw peanuts was transformed into a basket of clean nuts and a cloud of chaff. The efficiency was breathtaking. We began cautiously. Deshawn mentioned to a few overburdened neighbors that he'd tinkered together a shelling contraption and would be willing to try it out for a small fee. Say 1 fen per gene shelled, versus the 2 fen per gene value of the shelled nuts at the state station. The first customer, Auntie Gao, who had arthritis, was skeptical but desperate. He brought a half-sack. 20 minutes later she left with her shelled nuts, her payment a mere 5 fun and a look of stunned delight. The news spread not as a formal announcement, but through the village's potent whisper network. Meanwhile, the tension between Zhang Ming and Su Xiu, strained by his temporary withdrawal, was reaching a breaking point. I saw him one afternoon skulking at the end of our alley, clearly waiting. She appeared not from her house but from the direction of the woods, a basket of wild herbs on her arm. Her greeting was not the usual timid murmur. It was laced with a new, steely reproach. "Teacher Zhang," she said, her voice carrying just enough. "Have I done something to offend you? You've been avoiding me as if I have leprosy." He looked shifty, glancing back toward our compound. No, Comrade Su, don't misunderstand. Just pressures at home. Father's health. You know how it is." "I know how it was," she said, her eyes welling with expertly summoned tears. "You were a compassionate man. Now you are a stranger." She let the silence hang, then delivered the line I knew was coming. "The first frost will be here soon. My coal ration is gone. The procurement office said, without a man to speak for me." She let the sentence trail off, a masterpiece of implied vulnerability. Zhang Ming's shoulders slumped. The savior complex, temporarily suppressed by paternal pressure, reasserted itself with a vengeance. "Don't worry, Su Xiu. I won't abandon you. This month's wages. There were debts. But next month I'll work extra shifts at the granary. I'll get your coal." Her face transformed, the tears vanishing, replaced by a smile of radiant, grateful dependency. I knew you hadn't truly changed. At that moment I chose to step out of the compound gate, Xiao Mei in my arms as if on a leisurely stroll. They froze, 2 guilty children caught with stolen candy. Su Xiu's face flushed a deep, mottled red. Zhang Ming looked stricken. I didn't address him. I looked straight at her, my voice calm and clear. "Seducing a man in broad daylight, right in front of his infant daughter. Don't you fear any heavenly retribution?" The mask of weakness shattered. Her eyes narrowed, all pretense gone. "People have to look out for themselves," she spat, her voice low and venomous. "Or the world will grind them to dust. My husband is dead. What choice do I have?" "The wicked always have a ready-made script," I observed. Then I dropped my own carefully crafted line. But have him. Truly. I am giving him to you. In fact, I heard some very interesting news in the county town. They say the Gaokao will be reinstated next year. When Zhang Ming and I both pass and leave for university, do you really think he'll glance back at this village? Do you think a university graduate, a future cadre, will still find a match in a peasant widow with no education? Her face went pale. I had introduced a virus into the cozy parasitic relationship. The future. She was betting on his present pity and proximity. I was pointing to a horizon where she became not a tragic beauty, but a rustic encumbrance. You're lying, she whispered, but the fear in her eyes was real. You're trying to poison us. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Wait and see. Test him. See what he chooses when the time comes. Your present need or his future glory. I turned and walked back inside, leaving them in the dusty alley. The gauntlet was thrown. The battle was no longer just between me and Zhang Ming or me and Su Xiu. It was a triangular war of attrition. And for the first time I was fighting not to keep a man, but to force a choice that would expose the rotten core of them both and finally set me free. The coins from the peanut shelling venture, split with Deshawn, began to accumulate in a new hiding place. They were few, but they were mine. They were the sound of a future being built, one fan at a time, in the dark of a tool shed far from the watching eyes of the Zhang compound. The harvest of my old life was ending. The sowing of my new one had begun. Winter clamped down on Willow Creek, a season of iron-gray skies, biting winds, and indoor confinement. The peanut shelling business, christened The Shed in Deshan's and my private lexicon, became a roaring, if discreet, success. The mechanical thrumware crunch was a siren song to women whose hands were knotted with arthritis and men who valued their time over a few fun. Deshawn, naturally taciturn, was the perfect frontman. He accepted sacks, quoted prices, operated the machine with stoic efficiency, and handed over the clean nuts without a word of gossip. I handled the accounting in secret, our ledger a series of cryptic marks on a piece of rice paper hidden in my bedding. The money was a trickle, then a steady stream. After splitting profits, my share was enough to buy extra powdered milk for Xiao Mei, a thicker quilt for my bed, and most importantly to begin secretly acquiring textbooks. Through a network of former classmates and Deshan's trips to the county seat, I started collecting dog-eared math primers, tattered volumes of Chinese literature, and mimeographed notes on politics and history. I hid them in a bamboo trunk under a pile of old clothes, studying by the faint glow of a kerosene lamp long after the household was asleep. The characters, once familiar friends, felt stiff and foreign at first. But with each hour of stolen study, the rust flaked away. A forgotten formula, a half-remembered poem. They returned, and with them, a sense of my own mind that was more nourishing than any meal. The Zhang household, meanwhile, was a pressure cooker on a low flame. The financial audit I had initiated created a permanent state of low-grade suspicion. Auntie Zhang scrutinized every purchase Zhang Ming mentioned, her questions sharp and pointed. 4 gene of pork? At that price? Are you feeding a brigade or our family? Old Zhang's medicine was a recurring crisis, each bottle a silent accusation. Zhang Ming, squeezed between his parents' newfound vigilance and Su Xiu's renewed, desperate claims on his savior complex, became sullen and irritable. The village gossip, once a background hum, now rose to a discernible chorus whenever we appeared in public. Walking to the commune clinic for Xiao Mei's checkup, we passed a group of women washing vegetables by the frozen creek. There he is, the filial son, one muttered, not bothering to lower her voice. Filial to the widow next door, they say. His wife looks well, though. Baby's fat and happy. Maybe she's finally wised up. Wised up? She's got her own money, I hear. That cousin of hers, Deshawn, he's got a machine. She's always over there. A machine? For what? Shelling. Does the work of 10 women. They say she gets a cut. No wonder she's not begging from him anymore. Zhang Ming's ears turned bright red. He walked faster, his jaw clenched. Village idiots, he hissed under his breath. Spreading capitalist rumors. Deshan's machine is for collective benefit. I said nothing. Let him believe the fiction. The truth, that I was a partner in a small private enterprise, would have been an even greater blow to his ideology and his pride. The real storm broke over the coal. True to his word, Zhang Ming took on brutal overtime at the granary, loading and unloading sacks in the freezing warehouse late into the night. He came home hollow-eyed, coughing, his hands raw. He presented the extra earnings to his mother with a flourish, a martyr returning with spoils. But the spoils had already been earmarked. The next day, a delivery of lump coal was made not to the Zhang compound, but to Su Xiu's smaller, colder house next door. Auntie Zhang witnessed the delivery from our courtyard. The explosion was volcanic. "You kill yourself working for our family and you give the coal to her?" she shrieked, grabbing a broom. "Your father coughs by a fire of damp straw, and that fox spirit warms her feet with our labor?" "It was my labor," Zhang Ming shouted back, a rare display of defiance. "My extra shifts." She would freeze. Let her freeze. What is she to us? We took in your wife, we fed her, housed her. And you dare prioritize a stranger over your own blood. She swung the broom not at him but at a nearby clay pot, shattering it. The fight raged for an hour, drawing the discreet attention of every neighbor within earshot. I stayed in my room with Xiao Mei, a strange calm settling over me. This was the crack widening. His family's self-interest was now in open, violent conflict with his chivalrous obsession. He could not serve two masters. In the aftermath, a strained, frigid peace descended. Zhang Ming stopped the overtime. The coal stopped flowing to Su Xiu. He retreated into a shell of resentful silence, burying himself in old textbooks of his own. The Gaokao rumor was now official policy, confirmed by newspaper and radio. It was all anyone in educated circles could talk about. It was his lifeline, his chance to vault beyond the petty squabbles of Willow Creek, beyond the grasping need of both his family and his mistress. He began, tentatively, to include me in this fantasy. Perhaps he saw my late-night reading. Perhaps he realized that a wife who was also a fellow student was a more respectable companion for a future cadre than an illiterate peasant widow. One evening he pointed to a complex physics problem in his book. "Do you remember how to solve this? The principle of levers." In my first life, I would have melted at this invitation into his intellectual world. Now I saw it as a tactical probe. I leaned over, studied the diagram. The torque must be equal on both sides. So, force times distance here equals force times distance there. I sketched the solution quickly on a scrap of paper. He stared first at the paper, then at me. A flicker of something like respect, quickly masked by possessiveness, crossed his face. You've been studying. A little. When the baby sleeps, it passes the time. We could study together, he offered, the words awkward. It would be more efficient. It was a breathtaking attempt at co-option. He wanted to absorb my efforts into his project, to make my success an extension of his own. Perhaps, I said non-committally. But my time is fractured. Feeding, washing, mending. You have the luxury of uninterrupted thought. He didn't miss the barb. He withdrew. The fragile bridge burned before it was built. A few days later he tried a different approach. It was the eve of the small New Year festival. He came home with 2 precious oranges, a rare luxury. He gave one to his mother and with a theatrical gesture presented the other to me. For you, Enin. For your health. Auntie Zhang's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. The entire family watched. It was a public peace offering, a reinstatement of my nominal position. I took the orange. It was cool and dimpled in my hand. I thought of the coins in my hiding place, of the textbook under my bed, of Deshan's steady, silent partnership. This orange was a prop in his play. Thank you, I said. Then I peeled it slowly, separated a segment, and placed it in my mother's hand as she sat quietly in the corner mending socks. Here, Ma. For your health. Then I gave a segment to Xiao Mei, who gummed it with delight. I ate one segment myself. The remaining half I placed on the table. For father, I said, nodding to old Zhang. Zhang Ming was left with nothing. Not the fruit, not the gesture, not the credit. I had accepted his offering and redistributed it on my own terms, asserting a different hierarchy, one based on care, not control. The message was silent but deafening. I was not a subject to be pacified with tribute. I was a power in my own right with my own alliances. His face darkened, but he could say nothing. To complain would be to admit the gift was not genuine generosity, but a political tool. The tension found its inevitable release through Su Xiu. Desperate, marginalized by the family conflict and sensing Zhang Ming's attention shifting toward the distant prize of the Gaokao, she made a drastic move. I heard it from Auntie Zhang, who relished the telling. Su Xiu had agreed to a matchmaker's introduction to a grain truck driver from the neighboring county. A man with a steady wage and a house but rumored to have a temper. The news struck Zhang Ming like a physical blow. All his repressed guilt and possessive pride surged to the surface. That night, as I pretended to sleep, I heard him rise, dress quietly and slip out into the freezing night. He was going to her, to the woman he saw as his damsel, now threatening to be distressed by another. I didn't need to hear their conversation to imagine it. Her tears, her accusations of abandonment, her ultimatum. Choose me now or lose me forever. He would plead, promise a future after the exams, the old, tired script. But a truck driver with a present wage was a more tangible threat than a student's potential. The next morning Zhang Ming was a ghost. He moved through his chores mechanically, his eyes bloodshot, his mind clearly elsewhere. The energy in the compound was charged, waiting for the lightning strike. Came 3 days later. I was returning from the shed, a small pouch of coins sewn into the lining of my jacket, when I saw the commotion on the main path. A crowd had gathered. At its center was Zhang Ming, his lip bleeding, squared off against a burly red-faced man in an oil-stained driver's uniform. Between them, Su Xiu was weeping dramatically, her hair disheveled, the sleeve of her jacket torn. I paid for this meeting, the driver was roaring, his voice slurred with cheap baijiu. I bought the tea, the cakes. And you let this scholar put his hands on you? What are you, a broken shoe? Everyone gets a turn in. Su Xiu wailed, covering her face. Zhang Ming, trembling with a rage I had never seen, stepped forward. Apologized to her. You crude bastard. Or what? The driver sneered, stepping closer. You'll write me a nasty letter? Who are you to her, huh? Her keeper. Zhang Ming, pushed beyond all reason, pride and caution, shouted the words that sealed his fate for everyone to hear. I am her man. The silence was instantaneous and absolute. Then a ripple of gasps and murmurs swept through the crowd. All pretense was gone. The comrade, the hero's widow, the socialist duty, all evaporated, leaving the raw, ugly truth of the affair exposed in the harsh winter light. Su Xiu didn't hesitate. She threw herself against Zhang Ming, sobbing into his chest, a public claim staked in the moment of maximum scandal. I stood at the edge of the crowd holding Xiao Mei. I felt no anger, no pain. Only a cold, clean clarity. This was the exit door swinging open. I walked forward. The crowd parted for me. I stopped a few feet from them, my voice calm and clear in the frozen air. Good, I said. Then the matter is simple. I looked at Zhang Ming. We will go to the village committee now. We will file for divorce. He stared at me, his face a mask of shock, guilt, and a dawning, panicked realization of the consequences. Su Xiu looked up from his chest, her eyes wide, then filling with a triumphant, possessive light. Zhang Ming began. But Su Xiu clutched him tighter. Wei, she whimpered, the perfect broken sound. Don't leave me. I have nothing. I am yours. He looked from her tear-streaked, beautiful face to my impassive one. He saw the condemning eyes of the village, the ruin of his reputation. In that moment the savior complex won. The man who needed to be needed made his choice. He straightened his shoulders, adopting a pose of tragic responsibility. Lin Yining, he said, his voice trembling with false gravitas. I have wronged you. I accept the divorce. I nodded, turned to a sensible-looking woman in the crowd, wife of the village accountant. Auntie Luo, please be so kind as to fetch my mother and his parents. Tell them to meet us at the committee office. Then I raised my voice, addressing the gathered neighbors, the jury of our peers. Everyone here is a witness. This divorce is by mutual consent, due to irreconcilable differences. If either party later regrets it, they can expect no sympathy in Willow Creek. I did not wait for a response. I turned and began walking toward the low, official building at the village center, my footsteps firm on the frozen earth. I did not look back to see if he followed. I knew he would. The script finally was mine to write. The bureaucratic process was swift, fueled by scandal and the village head's desire to quell the disruption. His parents arrived, his mother weeping furious, shame-filled tears, his father silent and shrunken. My mother came, her face pale but resolute, holding a bundle of my things. Zhang Ming signed where he was told. He did not ask about Xiaomei. There was no discussion of property. What was there to discuss? I owned nothing he valued. I signed my name Lin Yimin with a steady hand. The characters looked different. They looked free. I took the thin official paper that declared me no longer a Zhang. I took my daughter from my mother's arms. I walked out of the committee office, out of the shadow of the Zhang compound, and into the sharp, clean cold of my new life. The shackles were off. The machinery of my own future, silent and patient in Deshan's shed, was waiting. And in less than a year the Gaokao would be waiting too. I breathed in the icy air, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, it tasted not of mud and despair but of possibility. The first days of my divorce felt less like liberation and more like walking on a frozen lake after a lifetime on solid ground, exhilarating, terrifying, and unnervingly quiet. The shouting, the accusations, the oppressive weight of the Zhang family's expectations were gone, replaced by the simple, stark silence of my mother's 2-room cottage. It was small, the roof leaked in the far corner, and the single window looked out onto a chicken coop, but the air was free of judgment. Xiaomei, sensing the shift, became fussier, clinging to me as if I might vanish too. My mother hovered, a mixture of relief and profound anxiety etched on her face. What will you do, Yimin? A divorced woman with a child. The talk. Let them talk, Ma, I said, unpacking my meager bundle. They were already talking. Now they have a different story to tell. I placed my few books on a makeshift shelf. The physics primer, the literature anthology, the political study guides. They were my compass points. My immediate priority was money. The peanut shelling enterprise was now my primary, albeit secret, lifeline. With the scandal fresh, my frequent visits to Deshan's shed would have been fodder for a whole new cycle of gossip. We adapted. He became the sole public face of the shed. I handled the logistics from the shadows. After dark, once Xiaomei was asleep, I would slip out, a shadow among shadows, to his compound at the edge of the village. We would tally the day's intake, portion out the nuts for sale, and divide the coins by the flickering light of an oil lamp. The work was grounding. The clatter of the machine, the smell of oil and crushed shells, the tangible weight of the earnings in my palm. It was the antithesis of the abstract, draining emotional labor of my marriage. Deshan was a fortress of discretion. He never asked about the divorce, never offered pity. His help was practical. He reinforced the leaking part of my mother's roof. He brought over a sack of sweet potatoes from a surplus harvest. When I mentioned needing more advanced math texts, he returned from the county seat a week later with a water-stained but complete volume of calculus, bartered from a retired schoolteacher for 2 packs of good cigarettes. You don't have to do this, I told him one night as we bagged shelled peanuts. He didn't look up from tying the sack. The machine is half yours. His work is half yours. This, he gestured at the sacks, the ledger, is just work. But it wasn't. It was an alliance. In the stark landscape of my new life, Deshan's steady, uncomplicated presence was a sheltering tree. Meanwhile, the world I had left behind descended into the chaos I had once contained. The gossip network, now deprived of my daily drama, feasted on the Jiangsu household. Su Xiu moved into the compound as the new wife, a triumph that quickly soured. Accustomed to being the delicate object of charity, she was ill-prepared for the reality of being a Zhang daughter-in-law. Auntie Zhang, humiliated by the scandal and furious at the disruption, was a merciless taskmistress. Stories filtered out. Su Xiu burned the rice, couldn't carry a full bucket from the well, wept when told to clean the pigsty. Her beauty, once her weapon, began to coarsen under sun and resentment. Zhang Ming, stripped of his role as the noble provider caught between 2 women, seemed to shrink. His focus was the Gaokao, his only remaining path to redemption and escape. But the compound was no longer a quiet support station. It was a battlefield. The fights were legendary, audible through the thin village air. He wanted peace to study, she wanted attention, money, reassurance. He blamed her for the scandal that had tarnished his name. She blamed him for stealing her future, then trapping her in poverty. I saw him once at a distance, fetching water from the communal tap. He looked years older, thin and hunched, his eyes darting as if expecting attack. Our gazes met across the dusty path. A complex whirlwind of emotions passed over his face. Shame, resentment, a flicker of something that might have been regret. I felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. He had chosen his cage. I nodded once, a minimal, impersonal acknowledgement, and turned away. The connection was severed. He was a stranger. My own life became a disciplined trinity. Mother, student, entrepreneur. By day I cared for Xiao Mei and helped my mother with our tiny plot. I studied in stolen moments, while stirring porridge during Xiao Mei's naps late into the night. The calculus problems were fiendish, the political theories dense, but each conquered equation, each memorized date was a brick in my road out. The news was officially confirmed in the spring of 1977. The National College entrance examinations would be held that winter. A current of electric hope surged through the country, through every dusty village like ours. For millions it was a second chance. For me it was a first. I went to the county town to register, a momentous journey. I stood in a long line of haggard, hopeful faces. Former Red Guards, now farmers, factory workers, mothers like me. When I handed over my household register, the clerk, a bored young woman, glanced at the line denoting my marital status. Divorced. She looked up at me, then at Xiao Mei in my sling, her eyebrows slightly raised. She said nothing, but the judgment was there. I met her gaze steadily until she looked down, stamped my form, and handed me my examination permit. The paper felt like a visa. The final months were a blur of intense focus. My mother took on more of Xiao Mei's care, shooing me to my books with a fierce protectiveness. You study, she'd say. This is your fight. Deshawn managed the shed entirely, bringing me my share of the profits each week without fail, often with a snippet of useful information. Old teacher Lin in East Creek is holding review sessions, or the bookstore got a shipment of practice tests. The night before the exam, a freezing December evening, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Xiao Mei, listening to her soft breaths, my mind racing through formulas and historical timelines. A soft tap came at our door. My mother, thinking it was the wind, didn't stir. I wrapped a coat around myself and opened it a crack. Deshawn stood there, a ghost in the moonlight, his breath pluming in the air. In his hands was a small, cloth-wrapped parcel. For tomorrow, he whispered, thrusting it into my hands. For energy. Before I could thank him, he was gone, melting back into the shadows. Inside the cloth were 2 precious hard-boiled eggs and a lump of homemade brown sugar, dark and rich. A fortune in simple kindness. I held the sugar to my nose. Its molasses sent a world away from the bag Zhang Ming had stolen a lifetime ago. This was given, not taken. The examination hall was a former middle school classroom, icy cold, the windows frosted over. We huddled at our desks in thick coats, our fingers stiff. I looked around at the other candidates. Men with graying temples, women with lines of care etched deep, young faces blazing with ambition. We were all refugees from interrupted lives, gathered at this last checkpoint. I opened the test booklet. The world narrowed to the space between my eyes and the paper. The noise of shuffling feet, coughing, the scratch of 100 pens faded. It was just me and the questions. The math was challenging, but the logic felt clean, solvable. The Chinese essay prompt was about the meaning of struggle. I thought of the ditch, of the cold water, of the feel of a peanut sheller's crank, of Xiao Mei's weight in my arms. My pen flew across the page, not with polished rhetoric, but with the hard-won truth of a life reassembled. When it was over, 3 days later, I emerged into the weak winter sunlight feeling hollowed out and light, as if I had confessed every secret of my soul. There was nothing more to give. The waiting began. The new year passed, a quiet affair in my mother's cottage. We had a little more meat than usual, thanks to the shed's profits. Xiao Mei was talking now, her words clumsy and delightful. The Zhang compound, according to village gossip, was a silent, tense place. Zhang Ming had taken the exam too, but no one knew how he'd fared. Su Xiao was reportedly pregnant, a fact that brought Auntie Zhang no joy, only more anxiety about another mouth to feed. Then in late February, the results were posted on the bulletin board outside the County Education Bureau. A crowd had gathered, a pulsing mass of hope and dread. I pushed my way through, my heart hammering against my ribs. I found my candidate number. Then I traced my finger to the score. It was not just a passing score. It was the highest score in our county. For a moment there was no sound. Then it rushed in, the cheers of others, the sobs of disappointment. Someone clapped me on the back. I stood, frozen, staring at the numbers as if they were in a foreign language. Then a laugh burst from me, sharp and disbelieving. I had done it. I had actually done it. The formal admission letter arrived a week later, bearing the majestic seal of Peking University, the Faculty of Economics. It was thick, official, undeniable. I held it, the paper crackling, and this time I didn't laugh. I wept. Quiet, shaking tears of release that held a lifetime of deferred dreams. My mother wept with me, clutching Xiaomei. Deshawn, when I showed him, simply nodded, a deep satisfaction in his eyes. Good, was all he said. Tao, you go. Preparations began in a frenzy. My mother and I sorted our meager belongings. We decided she and Xiaomei would come with me. We would rent a small room near the university. I would study, she would care for Xiaomei, we would survive. The profits from the shed, combined with the small stipend for university students, would be our bridge. I went to the village committee to transfer my household registration, a necessary step. The clerk who had once judged me now treated me with wary respect. Peking University, he muttered, stamping the papers with extra force. Willow Creek's first. The news spread like wildfire. The divorced woman, the cast-off wife, was not just leaving, she was flying to the pinnacle. On the eve of my departure, as I was packing the last of my books, there was a commotion outside. Shouting, the sound of something breaking. My mother peered out the window, her face pale. It's next door. At the Zhang's. I didn't want to look, but a morbid pull drew me to the window. In the twilight I could see Zhang Ming in the courtyard holding a stick. He was screaming, incoherent with rage. Su Xiu was cowering against the wall, sobbing. He brought the stick down, not on her but on a ceramic water jar, shattering it. You stupid, jealous woman. You ruined me. A 0. They gave me a 0. My blood ran cold. A 0 was not a failing grade. It was an administrative death sentence. It meant disqualification, a void. Su Xiu's voice, shrill and defensive, pierced the air. You wanted to go. You wanted to go to the capital with her. To abandon me. I changed your registration number. So what? What do you need college for? Weren't you just going to leave me here to rot? The truth, ugly and violent, was out. In a fit of paranoid, possessive jealousy, Su Xiu had sabotaged his exam application, ensuring his paperwork was invalid. She had burned his bridge to the future to keep him in her miserable present. Zhang Ming let out a raw, animal sound of agony. All his sacrifice, his studying, his dreams of redemption, obliterated not by fate, but by the vengeful hand of the woman he'd chosen. He dropped the stick, sank to his knees in the debris of the broken jar, and began to weep, great heaving sobs of utter ruin. Auntie Zhang ran out, wailing. The scene was one of pure Greek tragedy. I turned away from the window. I felt no triumph. Only a profound, shuddering horror at the destructive power of their twisted bond. Their shared future wasn't the bright one he'd promised her. It was this. A prison of mutual resentment, built on a foundation of sabotage and despair. The next morning, as Deshawn loaded our few trunks onto a borrowed tractor cart for the trip to the county bus station, the Zhang compound was silent as a tomb. No one emerged. As our cart rattled past their gate, I caught a glimpse through the crack. Zhang Ming was sitting on the doorstep, head in his hands, a statue of defeat. Su Xiu was nowhere to be seen. We reached the end of the village path. I looked back at Willow Creek, a smear of brown and gray against the hills. I thought of the girl who had entered that compound full of hope, and the woman who had died cold and alone in a ditch. Neither of them was me anymore. I turned my face forward toward the dusty road that led to the county, to the bus, to the train, to Beijing. Xiaomei babbled on my lap, pointing at a passing bird. My mother clutched my hand, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. The engine coughed to life. The cart lurched forward. The past, with all its pain and lessons, receded. Ahead was the gate, and beyond it, a sky wide enough to fly in. Beijing was a sensory avalanche. The noise was a constant, roaring presence. Clanging trams, 1,000 bicycle bells, the shouted dialects of every province. The scale was incomprehensible. Streets wider than Willow Creek's river, buildings that scraped the smoggy sky, crowds that moved with a purposeful, impersonal energy that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Our room, near the university, was a 6-square-meter partition space in a converted courtyard house, shared with 2 other families. We had a single bed, a small stove, and a trunk for our belongings. It was smaller than my room in the Zhang compound, but it was ours. The air smelled of coal dust and distant cooking, not of judgment. The university itself was a world of its own, a sanctuary of ordered stone paths, stern-faced buildings covered in ivy, and an atmosphere of hushed, intense purpose. On my first day walking through the giant wrought iron gates with my new student permit, I felt like an imposter. The other students seemed so young, so unburdened, their conversations sparkling with theoretical debates about Marx and Keynes, their clothes neat and urban. I was a 28-year-old divorced mother from a village no one had heard of, my hands still rough, my accent tinged with the countryside. But I had one advantage they lacked. I knew the cost of this opportunity down to the last fen. I had bought it with years of my life. I would not waste a second. I became a ghost in the library, always the first to arrive and the last to leave. I devoured my economics textbooks, translating the dry theories into the lived realities of rural procurement prices and the black market mechanics I'd glimpsed in the village. My professors, initially wary of this older, silent female student, soon took notice of the precision of my questions and the practical edge of my essays. I asked not just what, but why, and who does it help? My mother was my rock. She transformed our tiny space into a home, navigating the baffling complexities of city ration coupons and communal water taps. She cared for Xiao Mei with a fierce, joyful love, taking her to the university's grassy quadrangles to play, teaching her songs I'd forgotten. Xiao Mei blossomed in the city, her vocabulary exploding, her curiosity endless. She was my living reminder of why every moment of struggle was necessary. Money was a constant, grinding anxiety. The state stipend was meager. The savings from the shed dwindled. Deshawn sent money orders when he could, always with a brief and signed note. From the business. It was never enough. I took on tutoring jobs, coaching the children of university staff in math. I wrote articles for a small economics digest, translating dense policy into plain language for a pittance. We ate simple, cheap food, noodles, steamed buns, cabbage stir-fried 100 ways. We patched our clothes until the patches needed patching. It was a life of profound fatigue and even more profound freedom. I answered to no one. My time was my own. My mind was my own. The exhaustion was physical. The energy was spiritual. In my second year I met Chen Yang. He was a graduate student in the engineering department, a tall, quiet man from the industrial north. We were assigned to the same small study group for an interdisciplinary project on rural infrastructure. He was not handsome in a classical way, but there was a solidity to him, a calm competence. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was to offer practical solutions, not theoretical grandstanding. Our project involved designing a low-cost grain drying system for cooperative farms. While others debated material costs, Qin Yang asked about local labor availability and repair skills. When I discussed the seasonal cash flow problems of farmers, he nodded and sketched a modification that would allow the system to be built in stages. We worked well together, our minds complementing each other's. My understanding of rural economics, his grasp of practical engineering. One evening, working late in an empty classroom, a fierce spring thunderstorm trapped us. The lights flickered and went out. In the sudden dark, illuminated only by flashes of lightning, I felt a moment of panic, a remnant of old fears. I heard him stand, then the strike of a match. He lit a stub of a candle he'd found in a drawer. The small, warm light pushed back the darkness. "My sister is afraid of storms," he said, his voice calm in the gloom. He didn't offer false comfort, just a simple statement of fact that normalized my fear. He stayed, working by candlelight until the storm passed and the lights sputtered back on. He walked me back to my courtyard, an umbrella held more over me than him. He didn't try to save me. He just saw the problem, the storm, the dark, the long walk, and applied a quiet, competent solution. It was a revelation. We became friends. He was respectful of my time, my responsibilities. He brought small gifts for Xiao Mei, a cleverly folded paper bird, a smooth stone from a river. He fixed our wobbly stool without being asked. He spoke to my mother with genuine respect, calling her auntie. One day he found me in the library, staring unseeingly at a page, my eyes burning with fatigue and worry over a missed tutoring payment. He sat down opposite me. "Lin Yimin," he said, using my full name with a gentle formality. You are trying to carry the mountain alone. It is not efficient. And it is not necessary. I looked up, defensive. I have no choice. You have a friend, he said simply. Friends share burdens. It is not a weakness. It is good engineering. He began to help in his practical way. He introduced me to a better-paying job assisting a professor with data entry. He helped Xiao Mei with her early counting. He brought over a hot meal on nights he knew I'd been tutoring late. His care was not a performance. It was infrastructure. Steady, reliable, built to last. Love, when it came, was not a thunderclap. It was the slow, dawning realization of safety. It was looking forward to his calm presence at the study table. It was the sound of Xiao Mei's giggle when he swung her onto his shoulders. It was my mother's face relaxing when he was around. It was the knowledge that here was a man whose promises were not poetry, but plans, and whose plans were always fulfilled. He asked me to marry him on a crisp autumn day, not with a ring but with a carefully drawn blueprint. It was a sketch for a small, efficient house. I cannot offer you grandeur, he said, his ears turning slightly red. But I can offer you stability. A partnership. A home where you can study and Xiao Mei can grow and your mother can rest. We can build this together. I looked at the blueprint, at the clean lines denoting rooms, windows, a small garden plot. It was a map of a future I had never dared design for myself. It was not a rescue. It was a proposal for a joint venture. Yes, I said. My voice was steady. We can build it together. We married in a simple ceremony at the university's civil affairs office. Deshawn came from Willow Creek, bearing a generous cash gift from the shed, which had expanded under his sole management. He shook Qin Yang's hand, looked him in the eye for a long moment, then nodded, satisfied. My mother wept quiet, happy tears. Life, which had been a desperate struggle for survival, began to unfold into something resembling contentment. Qin Yang graduated and took a position with a state construction bureau. His salary, combined with my stipend and my own growing income from freelance economic analysis, allowed us to rent a slightly larger apartment. A real apartment with a private kitchen. We had a son, little Gang. My mother doted on her grandson, her world now full of children's laughter instead of fear. I graduated with top honors. My thesis on price mechanisms in rural commodity markets drew attention for its gritty real-world grounding. I was offered a research position at a government think tank attached to the Ministry of Commerce. It was a foot in the door of the policy-making world. As I navigated the corridors of power in Beijing, a world of subtle hierarchies and complex alliances, the lessons of Willow Creek served me well. I knew how to read unspoken tensions, to calculate true motives beneath fine words, to be patient, to work harder than anyone expected. I was no longer fighting for my personal survival, but I found a new purpose. To use my voice, my hard-won understanding of the countryside's reality, to influence policies that might prevent other women from being trapped in the ditches of their lives. The end.